Hello again. Before I start, I should explain I've had for many years a particular interest in Igbo culture and language since the time of the Biafran War, really. It led to my studying Igbo at one time. I used to go to evening classes in Igbo. There's a long story behind this. I used to know Colonel Ojukwu also at one time, the former leader of Biafra. When he was in exile, he ended up, of all improbable things, living in the London district of Hackney, where I used to see him. But there, I want to talk a little bit today about what some people describe as a form of African writing, although it's not really anything of the sort. This is Nsibidi, which is a set of symbols. I'll show you the symbols here. In total, there are probably fewer than 1,000 of these symbols, and there's no grammar associated with them either, which means that they're not a writing system in the way that English, Arabic and Gujarati are, for example. Also, the meaning of the symbols varies according to circumstance and where they're being used and by whom, which would also make it tricky to regard them as a writing system. They're actually something very much more interesting than writing. Of course, you can use the Nsibidi pictogram to send messages. The meaning of such messages is very limited, but they can fulfill such a function. The closest parallel I can think of in Western culture would probably be, for that particular use of the symbolic system, would be the Hobo signs, which are found in both Britain and the United States. These signs are, not so commonly now. They used to be chalked on walls or on pavements to let drifters and transients know something about the area they were in. They might warn that the police were very strict in the district, or that one householder in particular was a soft touch, or that there was a vicious dog, something of that sort. The hobo signs, tramp signs, weren't really writing. In fact, they're not writing, but you can combine them to provide information. Nsibidi can be used in the same way, but that's only one aspect of it. And looked at in that way, it's a very primitive form of communication if you see it from the perspective of trying to look at it from the Western view of writing. You could indicate that 3 men had come to a village to sell livestock, for example, but you couldn't get across a simple sentence that we could construct in English, like, I used to like cats. But that's applying Western ideas to something which is not really, it's not that we're comparing apples and pears here. They're two different things. And Nsibidi is not limited to one particular language. It's used mainly in the Cross River state east of Port Harcourt. But there's a number of languages spoken there. It's not limited to Igbo or anything of that sort. It's a little bit like Chinese ideograms. I can't speak Chinese at all. I can recognize Chinese ideograms, or some of them anyway. I can look at a page of text and I can pick out words like mountain or moon or man, big, things like that without speaking a word of Chinese. And it's the same thing here. The earliest forms have been found in ceramic pots in Calabar, which now lies on the border of Nigeria and Cameroon. You can incise these signs in pots. You can chalk them on a wall. You can draw them in dust on the ground. You can also sign them using your hands to indicate them. The meaning can vary. It can you can use these symbols for religious meanings as well as mundane, everyday, secular purposes. And the best way of explaining this is to give an example from British culture. My uncle was illiterate to the extent that he couldn't even write his own name. To sign for his wages, he would mark a cross. And that used to be quite a common way. Well, I say common, I've certainly worked with people that can't write and just mark a cross to indicate their name. Yeah, okay, if you're writing a cross, that's an accepted convention. But we can use the cross sign with signalling with our hand as well, in which case the meaning changes dramatically to when you scribble it on a piece of paper. If I do this, at once we know now that I'm talking of my relationship with the deity. It's got nothing to do with the cross on paper at all. But that's not all. If instead of starting at my left shoulder, I start at my right, so now that tells you that I'm actually a Russian Orthodox Christian, and that I've got a completely different set of beliefs from someone that crosses themselves in this way, from left to right. I'm wondering whether or not this is making any sort of sense. This is just something as simple as a cross. The comparison that I've just gave with the use of the cross, whether it's written or signed in the air, that comparison with Nsibidi symbols isn't exact, but it gives you some rough idea. They were closely associated with the leopard men, which were semi-secret societies in West Africa at one time. That's where they flourished. Today, they're also associated with men's societies and women's societies, and the different symbols have varying meanings according to who's using them. I wanted to talk a bit about this subject because somebody commenting on here the other day seemed to have the idea that this was exclusively an Igbo thing, which is of course absurd. It all ties in with what I've been saying recently on the subject of civilization and cities in Africa. There's a lot of very interesting things in Africa, but it's not always possible to fit them into the neat pigeonholes with which we are familiar in Europe and America. So I'm irritated when I see people describing Nsibidi as being African writing, because it's really not. It's something quite different, and there's no real exact English word that describes it.